Good afternoon. I think it's past 12:15, so we'll get things started. I've been given about 3 pages to read. I think I'm going to cut that down just a little bit here. But welcome to Miami. This marks the 50th anniversary of our society, the 50th time we've had an annual symposium. I think that's a pretty awesome achievement. And so we will have a wonderful gala. That's on Tuesday night. My presidential address will be a history of this great society from its beginnings in the Los Angeles area as a small get-together to a national powerhouse. So I'm very excited about this. So welcome. Before I get started, I'd like to express my gratitude for all who have made this program, put it all together. We have the program chair, Karen Wu, and the program committee. John Bismuth for his work on the focus sessions, which will start in just a minute. Alan Lumsden for his work on the international panel, and the member-at-large's work for the special interest group. We do need to thank some of our sponsors. We couldn't do this without them. The premier platinum status is Gore and Associates. The platinum status is Cook Medical and Medtronic. Gold status, Penumbra and Terumo. Silver status, Advanced Oxygen Therapy. And bronze status, Abbott. I think it's wonderful that they continue to support this society. We also have our fellow program support, that's Gore. The Fellows Workshop, that's Penumbra. Incoming Fellows support, Cook. The Young Vascular Surgeons Program, Medtronic, and the Top Gun competition support, that's Gore, Terumo, and Medtronic. Lastly, we have the Lunch Symposium, which would be Gore, Penumbra, and Medtronic. Tomorrow, we're going to kick off with abdominal aortic. We're going to move on to some special interest cases. We'll have some scientific sessions. And then Mike Conti is our distinguished visiting professor. I've asked him, in the setting of the BEST trial results, to talk to us about the status of revascularization today. So hopefully that will be a wonderful talk. Then we'll have the Top Gun competition. Tuesday, we'll have our international panel. We have panelists from Finland, Italy, and Germany, followed by my presidential address. We'll have the business meeting after that. And then Tuesday afternoon, we'll have the second focus session that Dr. Bismuth has put together on leadership is crucial to vascular surgery, and the Carmody poster competition. Lastly, I'd like to point out that we do have the gala for Tuesday night. If you're going and don't have tickets, ticket sales end tonight. They do have to have the numbers for tonight so that the chef can be ready for Tuesday. So if you're going, please, by completion of business today, get your tickets. And I think with that, I'll welcome John Bismuth and the panel for the first focus session.
Robert, here. I'm going to invite up Russell Sampson. Robert Hacker is going to come up and join me here at the podium. So just a few more announcements. Again, for SCVS is trying to go green on the mobile app, so download the meeting app if you don't have it already on the App Store, and you can download the Guidebook app and search for SCVS 2023. Thanks to the sponsorship by Gore and Associates, we are offering complimentary Wi-Fi in the meeting space. Once you download your app, you go to the Wi-Fi page for instructions on how to log in. We also have a great opportunity with Dr. Veith. He will be handing out and signing his book, The Medical Jungle, tomorrow, March 27th from 7 to 12 p.m. in the Advanced Oxygen Therapy, is that a real thing? Yeah. Booth in the exhibition hall. Be sure to take advantage of this perk and claim your copy of the book tomorrow. New for 2023, an initiative to promote collaborative efforts between SCVS members. These are noted within our program with a collaboration icon image when you look at the program. And thank you to those abstract submitters that did participate in this. We will again be accepting abstracts for special consideration to the 2024 meeting. The criteria is 3 or more SCVS members, original abstract, encourage multi-institution experiences, and the priority be given to papers not derived from large national databases. With that, I'll start this first session focused on private practice and its impact on vascular surgery, and I think it's very appropriate to have a first talk about the history of SCVS. Obviously, as we heard, you'll hear a little bit more about this for the presidential address, but I'll invite Fred Weaver to come up and give us a little bit of a background on the meeting. Thanks, Fred.
Thank you, Sean. It's a great pleasure to open up this meeting and provide a little bit of perspective for this symposium and how it all started. It's a pretty fascinating story. Let's see. Is there a... here we go. You mean the forward and back? Yeah. So it all started here in the city of Los Angeles, greater Los Angeles area. Home to some snow-capped mountains these days because of the weather that we've had. Traffic, unmanageable traffic, earthquakes, Hollywood, the Dodgers, the Lakers, the Rams until they betrayed us and left and went to St. Louis in the 90s. USC and UCLA. This is where this all started. And it started because vascular surgery really began in the 1950s. That's when aortic aneurysm surgery, carotid surgery, lower extremity revascularization, aortic endarterectomy, aortic grafts, heparin, angiography, blood bank, it all kind of came together in the 1950s and basically spawned a first generation of vascular surgeons who had to figure out how to take care of patients, what kind of outcomes should be expected, and what kind of procedures should be done. And this was really nice summed up in this presidential address by E.J. Wiley from UCSF, The Quest for Excellence, and I would recommend it to any of you. It's a really good read about where vascular surgery was in 1970 and how it was trying to find its way as a specialty and why it was different, why it was very, very different than general surgery. At the time, there were 2 vascular surgical societies, but they were kind of academically based. You really had to have an academic full-time appointment to be part and to actually present. And the presentations were not necessarily clinically focused as far as outcomes and what you could expect in taking care of vascular patients. And the presentations were very short, and many of us who actually went to these meetings in the 90s remember the construct. But there was a forum that was needed. There was an unmet need. There was a forum needed for the practicing vascular surgeon really to share just their experiences in everyday clinical practice and outcomes. Los Angeles at the time, probably secondary to the war and the migration of people to LA, had a critical mass of surgeons who became very, very interested in the clinical practice of vascular surgery. And Peter Samuels, who I had the good fortune of meeting, was a vascular surgeon in the San Fernando Valley, and he had an idea. And that idea was to create a society for the clinical vascular surgeon. And he shared this idea with Wiley Barker, who was a full-time academic vascular surgeon and general surgeon at UCLA, and Max Gaspar, who was on the faculty at USC as a vascular surgeon. And listed here are other very, very important individuals who contributed to the thought process and to the collective will to form this society. And I had the good fortune of meeting many of these surgeons in the latter part of their career. And the purpose was the advancement of the art and science of vascular surgery, to provide a forum for vascular surgeons, and to improve the delivery of health care in vascular disease to the public. Who were these vascular surgeons? Well, almost all of them had served in the military in World War II in some capacity. They were all trained as general surgeons in the 1940s. But they then focused their practice on this new, exciting discipline of vascular surgery. They all practiced in the greater Los Angeles area. They saw the need for an ongoing analysis of vascular procedures and outcomes. And they saw the need for training the next generation of vascular surgeons. And in fact, Dr. Gaspar established one, if not the first vascular fellowship in the country. There's some debate with whether UCSF was first or whether Dr. Gaspar's fellowship was first. But they saw that need, and they were interested in education. Most of them did have some kind of academic affiliation with either USC or UCLA. So they got together and discussed Dr. Samuel's idea, and they had an organizing meeting in 1969, and they actually created some bylaws, which they formalized in 1970, and they founded the Society for Clinical Vascular Surgeons. Their initial membership had 40 dues-paying members. The first meetings were periodically at the Sportsman Lodge in Studio City in the San Fernando Valley, and actually Dr. Samuels would then produce a palpable pulse report of the festivities during those meetings. Consisted of inviting a speaker of the highest caliber to discuss a topic of interest to practicing vascular surgeons, and their first speaker was Gene Strandis from the University of Washington, who spoke on the use of Doppler flow meters in the practice of vascular surgery. So Studio City is right here, and Sportsman's Lodge was quite a place in the 1970s in the San Fernando Valley. It actually was founded as literally a hunting lodge for people that would go out and then hunt and fish in the San Fernando Valley and the environments around that area. Obviously, San Fernando Valley has changed significantly since then, but it was also a haunt of all the iconic Hollywood celebrities such as Elizabeth Taylor, Humphrey Bogart, and Clark Gable. Interest in the society grew. Word got around regionally and nationally, and soon the society outgrew the Sportsman's Lodge. So there was a need for a larger venue, and there was a desire. The group, they knew they were onto something, and they wanted to have this more of a national meeting. So what to do? They didn't have really a way themselves to actually publicize and promote this meeting. And so Dr. Barker is absolutely essential, and I had the good fortune of knowing him quite well, basically affiliated the Society for Clinical Vascular Surgeons, which became the Society for Clinical Vascular Surgery, with UCLA, provided CME, and then nationally publicized this meeting to make it more of a national forum. So the first meeting was held at Erewhon Hotel in Palm Springs, California. This was about 107 miles from Los Angeles, just east. And at the time, it was one of the favorite getaways for Angelenos, and was just coming into its own as a destination. And I think this was the hotel. Now, the Erewhon Hotel that they attended, it no longer exists, and this is what I found. So I think kind of an interesting motif, if you will. And I also, from the archives, was able to pull the first welcome reception for the Society for Clinical Vascular Surgery. There's 3 invited guests: Felix Eastcott, carotid surgery fame with Charles Robb, David Hume, and Tony Imperato. David Hume was a well-known renal transplant surgeon, vascular surgeon, chief at University of Virginia, and Tony Imperato as well, NYU, in carotid disease. But there was also tragedy. Dr. Hume was a pilot, and so he decided to charter a plane out of Van Nuys Airport, which is in the San Fernando Valley, to fly home himself. So he charted this Aero Commander 650, and shortly after it took off, it crashed into the mountains surrounding the Los Angeles basin, and he died at 55 years of age. So triumph and tragedy in the first meeting of the Society for Clinical Vascular Surgery. This is the tie. There was always an obligatory tie in those days. And this tie was designed by Dr. Samuels and David Sachs, his partner. It symbolizes Alexis Carrel's triangulation technique. And this is kind of the subsequent genesis, subsequent course, which Sean will, of course, talk more of. From 1973 to 78, Dr. Samuels was president. 1977, the American Journal of Surgery agreed to publish the papers. Dr. Gaspar became president in 79. They created a vascular registry. Alistair Carmody created a vascular registry within the Society for Clinical Vascular Surgery, kind of a forerunner, actually, of the Vascular Quality Initiative, if you will. And Dr. Robert Blumenberg was the first East Coast president, and the first meeting on the East Coast was in Orlando in 1986. So, there was an unmet educational practice need in the new discipline of vascular surgery. There was a champion, Peter Samuels, with this idea, core group of practitioners who were dedicated to this idea, a collective will to make it happen, assistance from a willing sponsor at UCLA, Dr. Barker, and the rest is the history of the Society for Clinical Vascular Surgery. No audio, but anyway, you've all seen this. There you go. If you build it, they will come, and they've been coming for 50 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go to the next speaker, titled Dispelling the Myths of Private Practice. And I'm going to ask Lila Moribi to come up. Now, she's not a private practitioner, but she wrote on this some time ago, and I thought it was highly relevant to the session. Hope she gives what I anticipate she'll give.
Thank you very much. So I have no financial conflicts, but it is a long-held belief of mine that the concepts of academic versus private or community practice are false equivalents. So I'd like to thank Dr. Bismuth for the privilege of allowing me to stand on a soapbox for a couple minutes. So the bottom line up front, too long. If you don't want to hear the rest of the talk, we need both. And most positions today will fall on a continuum. The old paradigms are largely gone. So when I was a resident several decades ago, I was told that in private practice I could expect to only do clinical work, that I would make more money, and I would have complete control over my practice. Where if I went into academic practice, there would be a large burden of administrative work, the money would be lousy, I would have to publish or perish, I'd have to get grant funding early and maintain it throughout my career, and I'd be locked into the practice with no voice in the decisions of the practice. Education starts early, so this is part of the Association for Academic Surgery's blog. I'm just a medical student. What is this academic surgery business? So now I don't disagree with the conclusion the AAS puts forth that academic surgeons are innovative, they're passionate, they're committed, and they're always teaching. Historically, the academic surgeon was somebody who was a solid clinician, a solid educator, and a funded basic scientist. However, with the increase in clinical research, translational research, health services research, education, and global health, that paradigm has really changed. So what do I know? Why am I up here? Those of you who know me know that I've always been in an academic practice. I've always had a .edu email address. I've been in 3 different academic practices, and they've been insanely different practice environments, and I've had varied research interests over my career. And I think the reason that Dr. Bismuth asked me to talk about this is I don't need to be changing the minds of our colleagues in community or private practice. I need to change the minds of some of our colleagues in academic practice. So how do we decide? One of the best studies out there, and it's one of the few studies out there looking at how we actually make our decisions about pursuing an academic versus a private practice, came out of the University of Virginia. They distributed a survey to 135 of their graduated residents, and they had a response rate of 51%, which is fantastic. I would kill to get a response rate of that. 63% of those respondents were in academic practice, and they noted that they had more publications during their surgical training, and they also had slightly more student debt than those that went into private practice. The remainder were in non-academic practices. They didn't have anybody that did straight government practice. So the factors that were felt to contribute to an academic career were similar for both types of surgeons, including involvement in education and trainees and access to mentorship. Both groups were discouraged from academic practice by the requirements of grant writing and funding responsibilities. Interestingly, the surgeons that were in academic practice were more likely to recommend surgery as a career to more junior trainees. So here's some more data. In an online survey distributed to almost 26,000 surgeons, and this is a biased sample because they were all fellows of the college. This only had a 15% response rate. But they got a pretty balanced response of about 1,700 in academics and about 1,400 in private practice. But this was published in 2020. 80% of the respondents across the board were men. Median age, right here, 50s, and median work hours were about the same between private and academic. The conclusions of this survey showed that academic surgeons were more likely than their private practice colleagues to be satisfied with their career in surgery. They were less likely than private practice surgeons to feel that competition with other surgeons was a threat to financial security, and they were less likely to feel that malpractice experience decreased their job satisfaction. Again, I want to just remind you that this was a really pretty biased distribution because they all went to people that chose to apply and were approved for membership as fellows in the college. So, to Dr. Weaver's point from earlier, at the presidential address in 2007, our president at the time, Dr. Brown, actually gave this as his presidential address. Academic medicine or private practice, you can't tell the players without a scorecard. And here are his words. And again, it gets back to the historical concept, whether people chose between a university or a private, can you do both? And an academic vascular surgeon isn't an academic vascular surgeon. They can be an asset to both the community and to academia. So I was going to put in a little video, but I decided it wasn't going to work, but you get it. Now I'm going to show you a couple quick vignettes to, I think, help prove my point. I think all four of the people that I'm going to talk about are in the room. Names have been changed to protect the innocent. I'm going with the LA theme again. So you could be prolific in private or community practice. So Surgeon Wood, over the last 5 years, has had 12 papers. They've had multiple societal leadership roles. They are at every regional and national meeting. Excellent educator, excellent surgeon. Surgeon 2, 10 papers in the last 5 years. Multiple societal leadership roles at many regional and national meetings, has been incredibly impactful as a mentor to medical students. They're not involved with residents, but they do have access to medical students. Been a profound impact. Also, excellent educator, excellent surgeon, not prolific in academic medicine. So this surgeon, 5 papers in the last 5 years. No societal leadership, rarely seen at meetings, fantastic educator, fantastic surgeon, active on editorial boards of journals. Surgeon 4, 3 papers in the last 5 years, regional leadership, excellent educator, excellent surgeon. So how do you engage in academic productivity if you're not in an academic setting? Device trials and reports, high clinical volumes makes you very attractive to working with companies and doing device development. Global health, health services research, clinical care processes, even informatics. All of these are doable. Some require more infrastructure than others, but all are doable regardless of practice situation. Options for leadership, guideline writing, societal membership, education, registry leadership, and hospital leadership. Doesn't matter whether you're in academic or in traditionally community or private practice, all of these are available to all of us. So my 2 cents. Infrastructure for basic science will limit where that person can work. Everything else is flexible. The ideal is to find the practice that resonates with you as an individual. And in any practice, whether it be academic or community-based, you can be innovative, you can be passionate, you can be committed, you can be an educator. What should we do differently? What can we take away? We should teach our trainees about the realities of practice. This is something I don't know that anybody does great. We have our courses, which are helpful, but we don't completely integrate it into our trainees' lifespan. We need to give them the tools to balance the business of medicine with the science of medicine. I mean, how many of us learned anything about billing, coding, interacting with referring physicians when we were training? We should be involving our trainees in everything that we do. And we should partner with our colleagues who are in different practice situations. Thank you very much for the privilege of the soapbox.
Thank you, Lila. So we'll move on to the next talk, and this will be from Mal Shahan out of LSU, why the private practitioner is potentially critical to resident training. Where is he? Oh, or flipped? Okay. Well, it's on this thing. I'm just reading this thing, right? So London Guidry is going to come up, and same practice, but different practice. She's in private practice, although part of LSU, and she's going to talk about the incentive to train residents in private practice.
All right, Layla, I have an EDU email and a Yahoo. Don't make fun. I get both. Thanks so much for letting me talk about the incentive to train residents. I think it's important overall, but because I am a hybrid model in private practice and academics, I'm going to talk more about private practice. I have no disclosures. So as we all know, there's a shortage of vascular surgeons predicted. In 2030, we're going to be about 18% short to take care of our aging population. And what I think is imperative to look at is that your RVUs are going to need to increase by 22% to keep up with the work demand, which is tremendous when you look at vascular surgeons who get the gold star for working more hours than anybody else. So we're trying to squeeze, I guess, more blood out of a turnip. Is that the saying? So the SVS put out a practice survey that I thought was very interesting. They had 660 respondents. Part of it was to look at the demographics of private practice versus academic. About 40% are in private practice, but half of us are over 50, and then we're going to be dealing with an aging population. So why should this matter to people in the room? Well, the more call you take, the more hours, the more burnout we're experiencing, the more abusive behaviors we're seeing. As we have aging surgeons and an expected shortage with an aging population, we need to train more vascular surgeons. Other specialties really need us more often, so that gives us increasing schedule demands as we're being called out of the operating room to help other surgeons. And then a lot of talk about residents and how we can incorporate private practice into the training of open cases as we're doing more and more endo. So the APDVS, which I think Dr. Shahan's going to talk about more in depth, but they did an amazing initiative of looking at 172 general surgery programs that were some low-hanging fruit without vascular surgeons, and 12 large private practices they thought could accommodate helping to train residents. Before the initiative, there were only 7 new programs. After the initiative, there were 28 new programs, pretty phenomenal. But of the private practice, there weren't any. And there may have been some overlap with some hybrid, but the main deep dive concerns were financial incentives versus disincentives, the administrative burden, and the really overall lack of interest, which I'm hoping might change when we talk about why do we train residents. Well, one, it really energizes you as a teacher and a lifetime learner. Everybody here is a lifetime learner, but when you have a resident pushing you, asking you why you're not doing something, it makes you think, maybe I should be doing something different. When you expose residents to private practice, they get overview of what's out there. And it may not mean that that's what they want to do, but at least it gives them the opportunity. It forges really great relationships between private practice and academics to do collaborative research. We don't want to just be stuck in one silo. It doesn't help our patients. Your quality of life can improve when you have an upper-level resident taking call. Trust me, it's pretty great. Residents and fellows versus APPs. APPs are wonderful, but they are really actually not equivalent to a fellow who can be a junior partner to you. And it's real fun to operate with those guys and girls. There are financial incentives. I don't think this is the perfect forum to talk about that, but I think it is something we can talk about. And as you know, IR, IC, and IN are on our heels, and we are not cardiothoracic surgeons. We have maintained our endo skills, huge importance. And a pipeline to hire partners, I think, is something down the road to think about as we're looking at our need for more surgeons. So why does it really matter to me? In 2005, there was this little storm that basically destroyed our program in New Orleans. And we were extremely lucky to have a partnership with a large private practice nonprofit hospital about 60 miles away. We had always sent one general surgeon there called the Country Club rotation, where they just went and operated. And so what we did is we were very lucky. LSU helped forge this relationship with this large hospital, and we used our resources. And these private practice docs have great pedigrees. These are people who helped train me, and in fact, one of them is my current senior partner. So in 2005, I was one of the little stick figures over there as a general surgery resident. We had one vascular fellow. In 2012, LSU added an integrated vascular surgery program, and by 2022, we had grown to be the third largest general surgery program in the country, 3 of which went into vascular surgery. Pretty great. Still maintaining our fellowship, still maintaining our integrated program. It's not just a natural disaster that can ruin a program and make you change. But if you know about Hahnemann Hospital, 550 residents all moved out because private equity bought and closed down that hospital. So I think private practice is integral to watch these types of things happen. So ACS, I caught this on the web, which I thought was great, reframing the value of resident education. It's not how much does it cost us to train them, it's how much does it cost us not to train them. It's about all of us in the room. So you want to know how do you fund it? Of course, you can partner with one of the 1,100 designated teaching hospitals, which is what my group does. You can partner with a non-teaching hospital for fundings outside of the caps. You can actually private fund from your own group. I know that sounds crazy and daunting, but it can be done. And GME funding is at a lot of hospitals that you can piggyback onto those resources. It's not an exponential ask. And I put industry funding low. I think that's an interesting topic. I think it's a buzzword. I don't know how we can make that work in the paying of residents. I think that's something that would have to be really thoughtfully looked at. There are 1,000 new graduate medical education spots that are coming up if you're a branch campus, if you're in a rural area, and that can be, again, you can ask me offline on that. Lastly, if you look all the way to your left, that's myself and my 2 former fellows that were harassing me in the operating room that are now my partners. And on the other 2 slides are current and former residents who I would hire in a heartbeat. So I think it's exciting, and you should think about being interested in training residents. Thanks.
London. I guess, Mal, now it is really your turn. And your talk is entitled Why the Private Practitioner is Potentially Critical to Resident Training, which should just be an expansion of what London has already spoken about. Thank you.
Yeah, it might be a bit of overlap, and since London is here, I will say definitely critical to resident training. So I have no disclosures. I have some societal obligations to APDVS and the VSB, but this is my opinion, everything you're going to hear now. So the story goes back to August 24th, 2005. My wife and I were new attendings at LSU, and we got called into the dean's office because there had just been a site visit shortly before we got there. And apparently, as we were learning sitting in the meeting, the program was going to be put on probation. The fellowship had 14 major citations, and they were all kind of pretty bad. As I kind of sat and looked through them, there was something like your evaluation forms are not competency-based. You do something based on horse sense, whatever that is. And as I looked around the room, I noticed the current program director wasn't there. And so I got a bit nervous, and Dr. Ollier, world-renowned vascular surgeon, was our dean of the medical school. And Dr. Ollier said to me, I don't know if he's here, he said, Mal, I'll do an impersonation of him anyway. Mal, it'll be very embarrassing to me if we lose this training program. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. And then the DIO chuckled and shifted about 500 pages of paper in front of me And then the meeting was over. And my wife, being much smarter than me, made eye contact with no one, said nothing. And so we sat in our Jeep driving on the way home, and I said, Claudia, what just happened? She's like, well, I think you're the program director now. And I said, all right. So I got the program with 14 citations on probation. And that same day, something called Tropical Depression 12 was moving through the Caribbean, slowly posing a minor threat to Miami. Now, that was a Wednesday. On Monday, that had become Hurricane Katrina, which posed a major threat, as you know, to the city of New Orleans. So 5 days after I became program director of a program on probation, I now had not only no hospitals, I had no city. So Katrina destroyed 80% of New Orleans, and with it, every teaching hospital we had. The University Hospital was destroyed. We even had people stranded there, including me, but we eventually got out. And hospitals like Lindy Boggs never reopened. Charity Hospital never reopened. So these hospitals weren't just damaged, they were completely destroyed and taken kind of out of circulation. It took us 10 years to rebuild these hospitals. So between 2005 and 2015, they rebuilt the VA and they rebuilt the University Hospital. But in those 10 years, we actually thrived. We had one accredited position when we started, and then we actually were able to increase it to 2 fellowship positions, and then we got approved for 10 integrated positions, all in a period of time when we really had no university hospital. And the reason is we went to the community. So my wife and I started a practice at something called West Jefferson Hospital in Marrero, Louisiana, right across the river. And about an hour west of New Orleans is Baton Rouge. And Baton Rouge, as London pointed out, is home of the largest hospital in Louisiana, Our Lady of the Lake. So going back to the hurricane, when I finally got out, I didn't know where our fellow was, but I had it on good authority he was alive. So I called someone named John Shellac, and I said, Dr. Shellac, we have a fellow. I can't house him. I can't train him. I can't do anything. Can you please take him? So Brett Segrist was our fellow that year, and Brett completed his entire year of training. I think I got him for 2 months, so he got 10 months with John Shellac in the lake. Now, this has become an integral part of our training program. So our integrated residents spend about 20% of their time, and it was never intended to be this way. I always intended to bring the fellowship back to New Orleans, to have everything in New Orleans, but I can't because they keep rating it as their best rotation. So despite the fact that it's an inconvenience, it's about an hour away, they love it. And so if you're sitting there with a program thinking, well, this is all very interesting, but it's unlikely that, a hurricane is going to hit Ohio or wherever you are, COVID-19 taught us a new lesson, right? We're all vulnerable to these threats to our training programs. Having these safety net hospitals is a huge deal. And we did a survey. I collaborated with a bunch of people on this, looking at the training programs around the country. And we found that 90% of trainees had their cases affected in some way by COVID-19. Now, I do think that we dodged a bullet. The final numbers from all these trainees are not available yet, but I do think we're going to be okay. But this just goes to show you how vulnerable we all are to these interruptions in our education process. So our program is well known with a large bit of help from the Baton Rouge program for having a lot of cases, especially a lot of the rarer open type cases. This is somebody at the end of her 4th year who had already greatly exceeded all the minimum requirements to graduate, so she still had her chief year to go. And when I looked at our case numbers just a couple days ago, there's our fellow has done 1,000 cases at the lake. The 5s and the 4s, between 400 and 700 cases there. So it's a huge part of our training program. Private community hospitals are just more efficient. They can get more done. They can have large volumes and get cases done. It's like surgery camp for them. I was actually looking through the individual cases. This is Dr. Mendoza. I don't know if you can see this, but this is like 1 week he had out there. A femoral end-art, an open ruptured AAA, something called the common carotid axillary artery bypass, which maybe Dr. Guidry can elucidate us on, and then also an SMA thrombectomy, an SMA stent, redo femoral anastomosis. So he's had quite a good week out there. So the cases are there. So the reason that we know that the cases are out there in the community is an interesting study presented in 2017 by Dr. Smith and colleagues. We're all worried about where these open aneurysm numbers are going. And so she looked at this from Medicare analysis and found that, the open aneurysm numbers are irrevocably going down. And they're going down across the board. And there's a lot of programs that now are finishing with less than 10 open aneurysm cases. But what I think is most interesting with this study is that 80% of the aneurysm repairs at that time were being done in hospitals with no training programs. So 80% of our available material we are not capturing. There is opportunity. So there is a lot of panic about open aortic numbers, and I'm here to say that's not all true. If you look at and you combine mesenteric aortic trauma, aortic occlusive disease, and thoracoabdominal aneurysms, most trainees 05s finish with between 40 to 45 open aortas. And fellows about the same, about 35 to 40 every year. Those are the last 3 years of data that I compiled. But how many is enough? This is Don Coleman's slide, leapfrog. What is the volume we need to be proficient at open aneurysm surgery? We haven't quite figured that out yet either. So there are other models. In Australia, they look at your case logs, and if you're deficient in a type of thing, they send you to a place in Australia where they do a lot of that stuff. So that's an opportunity that could become available to us as well. So why is this important? We talk a lot about vascular deserts, right, where we're not. Well, where we are not, nature abhors a vacuum. So at the same time, we tried to increase our vascular training numbers. Guess who else did? Interventional radiology, interventional cardiology. And actually, if you look at all training programs over that period of time, the two specialties with the largest increase in the number of active physicians were interventional radiology and interventional cardiology. So if we're going to ignore areas of the country, they will be filled, and they will be filled by our competitors. So London mentioned this. When this was actually part of an SVS, APDVS task force, we did identify 12 large vascular groups, but they weren't really interested in starting a fellowship. They cite financial, administrative support, and other problems. But I think we can partner with these groups because I think they would be open to having trainees. They just don't want to do it on their own. So again, what was in it for Dr. Shalak in 2005 when he answered the call and housed my fellow for that year? Well, if you look at his practice group, there's Dr. Deirdre, Dr. Gwynn, and Dr. Irfan, all of whom graduated from the LSU Fellowship, all of whom rotated with him. So it is a great resource to private practitioners to grow their own pipeline and fill their own practice needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mal. I'm going to invite up Dr. Aaron Moore to come up and talk about the negative impact of losing the private practitioner. I think Mal has probably already set the tone a little bit, but we'll see what Aaron has to say.
Good morning. Can I get a raise of hands, fellows that are in the room? Any fellows? Excellent. Good. I wish there were more, but I'm glad you're all here. So I was asked to talk about the negative impacts of potentially losing private practice, or what do we have to provide? I am a full-time private practice physician. So let me give you a little bit of my background. I joined a group of 2 vascular and 5 CT surgeons in Jacksonville, Florida in 2009 after leaving the U.S. Navy at 15 years of service. And everybody always asks me the same question. Why did you leave at 15? You could have gone to 20 and gotten retirement. I said I really didn't want another trip back to the sand. I wasn't emotionally prepared to do that. Once was excellent. Twice, I'm not sure I was ready to handle. And I wanted to do vascular surgery, not admin, which is what the United States Navy wanted me to do. So off I went to Jacksonville, Florida. I joined the only private CT and vascular group in Jacksonville. I've been that way for 30 years, outside of UF Jacksonville and Mayo, which are their own payer mix and fairly small in our community. And the group had merged originally from 2 competing CT groups in the early 1990s when they got smart enough to get together and realize that when they competed, they were racing to the bottom. As far as the third-party payers were concerned, they were doing everything they could to try to undercut each other in terms of payments, remuneration. And it was just not a really feasible situation. So they joined in the early 90s and never looked back. We started out by covering 5 hospitals initially, and that grew to 8 hospitals by 2015. 3 vascular and 5 CT surgeons have since been added to that. And the staff in our group, as far as medical staff and or admin staff, was mostly homegrown with a fairly long history with our group. Each surgeon has its own PA, especially once you made partner. All the CT surgeons certainly had a PA that were doing endovein harvest for them and rounding on the services. We'll talk a little bit more about the details moving forward here. So the well-meaning but blunt hammer of our federal government passed the Affordable Care Act in 2010, and they had specific goals. Some of that was obviously good and well-intentioned, as I said. Widen access to care, streamline care, decrease the cost of care if at all possible, reducing disparate care among specialties, aggregating physicians into vertical models of integrated care, and creation of accountable care organizations in order to try and do that. So, as stated by a senior Obama administration official in 2011, the economic forces lead to vertical organization. They want to accelerate physician employment by hospitals and aggregation into larger physician groups, because they thought if we do that, we're going to cut costs. We're going to get everybody aligned the same way. People are going to stop fighting. They're going to stop, quote, competing with each other, and they're going to align to all row in the same direction, and everything will be better. So what happened out of that is by 2008, we had 62% of physicians that were in private practice, and by 2014, that had shrunk to 35%. An ACS survey in 2014 kind of reflected that. About 35% were in some sort of private practice scenario. The rest were either employed or doing locums work, or frankly were retired. So trends in physician employment from January 29 to 21, kind of reaching into the COVID period, had some big findings. By the last 6 months of 2020, employment jumped nearly 4 percentage points to 69.3%. In 2020, 48,400 physicians left independent practice for employment. In January 21, 11,400 left private practice for hospital employment, which reached almost 50% by that point. And by 22, 20% of physicians were employed by corporate entities of some kind. So what do you lose with the loss of private practice doctors? You lose many potential things. One of them is independence. And when I say that, I mean power. Think about power. So this is a very interesting internal white paper that was published by the American Medical Association, where they surveyed 25 independent, highly functioning private practices in the United States across multiple specialties. And they learned a bunch of different things from talking to these individuals. So one of the things they noticed as far as benefit was for physicians and patients. Negotiating power was sought after in these business models for these very successful practices, with insurance contracts, with hospital contracts, with vendor contracts. And successful practices valued decision-making power for the physician owner. We want to be in control. Hiring doctors, mid-levels, and staff. We want to be in control of our salaries, obviously, if at all possible, how many hours we work and how we can modify that, and the methods and style of care that we render to our patients. So in our experience in our own group, insurance negotiations were from a position of strength. We were the only show in town for going on 30 years. So in many cases, our third-party payer contracts were either high percentages above or multiples of Medicare as far as reimbursement. With hospital negotiations, we negotiated things like directorship pay, where we would get in perpetuity yearly, for the sake of being involved with the hospital administrations, some remuneration back to the group as far as doing that work. Salary support for new hires in each hospital system was also sought and gained. Call pay to offset losses for uninsured and underinsured patients, and that continues as well, anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 per day per system as far as hospital systems, not per hospital. And we also gain strength with vendor negotiations as far as giving our ever-increasing size, which we'll explain later. Synergies were found to reduce costs in devices and equipment. It becomes an economics of scale thing. When you're dealing with one small group in one small community, perhaps with one small OBL as an example, the vendor's going to give you what they're going to give you. They may show you a little bit of love here and there, but it's going to be fairly small, as if unless you're negotiating across what might be multiple different areas across an entire region and multiple different OBLs or ASCs to talk about it. What else do you lose? Well, you lose identity to some extent. You become a cog in the machine. Like, where are you in this particular picture? Are you up in the north there? Or are you over down here in the corner? It matters, right? Again, back to the same white paper. Like this gentleman said from a small surgery practice in the Northeast, I don't have a practice, I have a family. And he said, I know that, I didn't want to drink the Kool-Aid. I can give quality care 24/7. I can do it my way, and my patients like it that way. Another guy said, we want to be important to our community, and we want the value being recognized in what we are looked at by the community, and people know what our practice is and what it matters to, and that it matters to us in terms of how we take care of that community. So in our experience, we began a big focus on branding and community recognition. This is just our local practice in Jacksonville, Cardiothoracic and Vascular Surgical Associates, PA. We hired a marketing person who really went out and did outreach and interface so that we could try to shore up the weak spots, find out in multiple different practices who would send into us, specifically primary care, wound care, and the skilled nursing facilities and whatnot, to try to gain recognition that you have patients with vascular disease. You're just missing it, and we don't want to catch these people late. We want to be able to treat them early. All physicians liaison with the referring community on a quarterly basis, nephrology, primary care, wound care, et cetera, and we do it in a rotating fashion. I'm actually going out next week for a day. Yes, it takes time out of my clinical practice, but what it gains in terms of the robustness of that clinical practice pays dividends. And we have a very intense focus on reputation within our community. We want to be looked at as people that don't treat our patients like commodities. We treat them like human beings that need care, good care, the right kind of care, the right way, and hold to an ethical standard. So what else do you lose? Involvement in terms of team dynamics and self-governance, and potentially innovation as far as the way you take care of your patients and the way you model your practice. So, again, back to this white paper. Physicians in independent practices that are high-functioning value their autonomy and their flexibility really highly. I like this one particularly. We think it's right and not necessarily what the hospital feels is the way we need to do things. How many times we go to the hospital and they plead poverty when we know the CEO is making 7 figures a year, and it's just very disingenuous. We want to be able to make our own decisions about doing things. And one of the things that this paper recognizes is that of all these practices, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Different communities have different styles of practices that have very, very good success rates. You have to play to the strengths of the community that you're in. I like this one too. Our joke is we just get 4 of us together with our administrator. We don't have to form 3 committees and study it for 6 months to make a decision. You can be nimble, you can pivot, you can flex, and we need to do that. At the end of the day, this marketplace changes quickly, and we need to know how to respond to that. And then this one too, practice is like a marriage. I would tell you it's more like an alcoholic marriage. Some days you have pancakes made for you. Some days you get smacked around. You're never sure what it's going to be day to day. But you don't have to like each other. You just have to row in the same direction towards a common goal and hold each other ethically and clinically accountable for the work that you're doing. So what is to be gained? Patient satisfaction. Now, this is a study, one of about half a dozen that I could put up on this slide, that come from, this one in particular is from Indonesia, from all over the world where they have a national health system, but where they have found that in their multi-tiered health systems, that those private physicians that are out there tend to have higher physician satisfaction scores. In our experience, we have weekly and monthly dashboard metrics. We have numbers crunchers instantly available for assistance to us to help us understand what we're doing and how we're doing it. We get real-time assessment with billing and collections. We have a strategic understanding of what and where we're providing care. Is it better to do this in a hospital? Is it more advantageous to do it in OBL? As the OBL model tends to wane in terms of reimbursement, do we need to transition into an ASC? Is that better? And at the same time, don't shove a round peg in a square hole. If a patient is low sick, they don't belong in your outpatient center, they belong in the hospital. And we give guidance to partners regarding delays in billing and documentation. I've got one partner in particular. He does the work. He works like just an absolute slave. But the problem that we run into is that he submits his paperwork late. And when he does that, it delays things, and through our revenue cycle, that costs time, and time is money. We get these dashboard metrics all the time. This is mine from just earlier this month, looking at all these different numbers. How long is the charge lag? Where are we doing the work that we're doing and how we're doing it, et cetera, et cetera. We have now a PMD is the name of the app that we use for census. So all of the censuses for all the hospitals are in one app on our phones. For charges, every time I walk out of the OR, I dictate the case, put the charge in PMD. It automatically goes to our billing folks. And we have an EMR interface that captures all that information. We do careful searches through Google and all the rest of these places looking for patient satisfaction on websites and health grades and so forth. And we try to respond to those when we can. Case in point, I had a patient who was complaining about my practice who'd never seen our practice. They were just unhappy because they made a phone call to somebody, none of which could be identified. We were able to respond to that back into that same platform and say, we've never seen the patient, at least have something out there so a patient doesn't look at that naively and go, oh, well, this person's not worth going to see. So, another thing that can be lost, inherent frugality. Vertical integration, hospital ownership of physician practices is associated with higher prices and spending. This is in health affairs. Here's one from CNBC. Patients see bills higher after doctors sell their practices. Even the MGMA is recognized, as you'll see in the bottom here, physicians employed by hospitals and health systems often lose money. And what we find is that, the increase in total organizational revenue through collecting technical and professional fees looks good, but the financial integration has led to higher total costs of care and increasing total healthcare spending. So it looked good on paper, but it may not necessarily be translating now that we are, 13 years later. from the time of the original ACA. And you can see that in total Medicare spending. This is from CMS.gov's website. Notice that the dip in 21 was not because we're saving money, it's because we closed down hospitals in the face of COVID. And so finally, incentive and investment, skin in the game. Back to that. High-performing private practices mean delivering high-quality health care and running a successful business. You want to have high-quality providers. It means to an end of providing better care. You need to be skilled and have a good rapport with your patients. It's not necessarily as important if you're an owned practice where you potentially have a guaranteed feeder source. You're careful about what you do and how you respond to your patients when you know it matters. And it's not just going to be an automatic that somebody's going to come after you. So the rest of our story, we partnered with private equity. Notice I said partnered. Equity can be good and it can be evil. It depends on how you use it. We were not an outright sellout. We have a vital distinction here. We have ownership in this entity. Physicians maintain clinical control and business savvy is obtained from our equity partners. We hired a CEO who had a lot of experience with clinical growth and practice success. We started reaching out to other independent practices to join us to gain synergies. Guys that are out there doing great work in their communities, looked at as being respected. We want them to be part of us. We want to be part of them. And corporatizing gain us growth and strength. We unleashed an Axiom database capability in a place where we were doing QuickBooks math. Now we're doing Axiom math, and that kind of power is pretty incredible. Better revenue cycle collections and practice modeling. Each practice maintains its unique character. We're not trying to have one size fits all. My practice in Jacksonville is not my partner's practice in Tallahassee, is not my partner's practice in Panhandle of Florida, but we're all part of the same practice, and that's pretty amazing. Organic growth generates returns to the physician partners. It avoids that eat what you kill work mentality. Doing 5 more carotids and 10 more fistulas this month is not how I'm going to get extra pay. It's in how our group grows as a whole and the ownership within that whole stake that matters for us. And corporatization has allowed for realistic buy-ins for new hires. I had a guy tell me, he said, we have $20 million in capitalization in our group. How do I tell you a brand new guy who we finally want to make partner, how do they buy into that? I said, it's real easy. Corporatize and let that poor guy buy some shares. Because as he does that, as your practice grows, as the company grows, so does his share price grow. He gets to the end of his 25 or 30-year career, and he's got a nice nest egg that he can retire on, and he's done great work the right way for the right reasons. We're now the largest independent CT and vascular group in Florida as of 2 months ago. Total 40 total physicians, which now include IR and cardiology. Yes, we've roped cardiology into this because they are part of this. Keep your friends close, your enemies closer. I think the whole key is in recognizing we're all doing this work. If we can all hold each other accountable for that work, the patients are better off. Our current pipeline has 50-plus cardiologists, another 15 vascular, and another 5 IR. Those are folks who are under either non-disclosures or have letters of intent to join our group. Our expansion now continues into Georgia, Florida, and reaching into Texas. Our goal is 100 physicians by the year's end, another 500 in the next 24 months, and if we can get to 1,000 in 4 years, fantastic. The most important goal, and this is how I want to end this, cultivate inspired physicians, properly motivated for excellent care, and with that, pride in their prosperity. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you, Aaron. We'll move on quickly to Russell Sampson, who's going to talk about the business of private practice, and obviously something you've spoken about a ton of times. So
no, I've never given this talk before. So, by the way, how many people here are in private practice? Good. Well, the 5 of you can stay, and the rest you can all leave. Well, look, I think we've heard about the importance of private practice, but if the private practice becomes insolvent, then it's really a waste of time. So what I'm here to really show you is, I think, probably how to keep these practices solvent, because I think most people come out of fellowship and they think that they're going to operate, medicate, and dilate, and they're going to make I think you know what I'm talking about, load of money. And it's really not true, because if that's what you think, that's completely wrong. Because if you look at a very, very busy vascular practice doing, say, 50 carotids a year, maybe 48 aneurysms, 24 distal bypasses, 200 or so SFA stents, multiple consults, then the actual income in the state of Florida would be $450,000. So that's a very hard-working private practice person making $450,000. But if you're in private practice, you have expenses in your office, and really this is actually more than 40%, it's probably nearer 50 or 60%, but let's say 40%, well, then your profit is just going to sink into the floor because basically you're going to make virtually nothing. So if all you do is standard vascular surgery, then I think you better hope that you win the lottery because it's changed. And we're just not paid sufficiently with the type of work that we do to make a private practice solvent. So I guess my job then is to, as he says, show me the money. So, but it's not all about money for money's sake. The point is that if we don't make enough money to keep our practice going, then we're not going to be able to offer the services that save lives and save limbs. So we have to make money to keep our practices going so that we can do the work that we're supposed to do. So here are my ideas about what needs to be done. First of all, we need to seek out income sources unrelated to the operating room. Not that we should stop going to the operating room, but we need other sources of income. We need to seek out income sources unrelated to just RVUs, not just the work that we do. We have to get paid for the work that we've been doing currently for free. We have to develop income sources that do not involve our labor specifically. And we need to get paid the global fee, which is the total fee, not only the professional fee, but the component that involves payment for what we actually outlay to do the work, even though that may take on risk. So basically what I'm showing is that we have to move out of the hospital, that's our hospital on the left, into our own outpatient facility. And by the way, there's only one car there because it was a Sunday, so we're not that a bad practice. And these are going to be my 10 commandments then of how you can improve your income. It's going to be a vein center, cosmetics, a vascular lab, an endo suite, get involved in prosthetics, perhaps hyperbaric oxygen and wound care in an amputation prevention center. We need to use physician extensors. We need to extend our E&M codes, get involved in clinical trials, and get paid for what we do for free. So commandment number 1 is open up a vein center, and other doctors less qualified than us are setting up these centers everywhere. Wouldn't be surprised if we don't see veterinarians doing it. And as you know, we should be the leaders in this field. The venous disorders are an integral part of vascular surgeons' practice, especially in the outpatient center, and they lend to us being doing this type of work. Also, commandment number 2, don't forget about cosmetic work. Now, you may be embarrassed to do this, but vein patients are vain. That's why they have veins. And they like to have fillers, and they like to get Botox, and they like to get their brown stains removed. And we have been doing that in our office. These are things that are easy to learn. You may be embarrassed to do them, but the patients are probably the people that are most thrilled by your work. If you get a person to really look good after they leave the practice. And I've been doing this technique of doing hand rejuvenation. There's a picture on the right. I'm happy to show people how I do this technique. But everybody that's come in with a facelift has got ugly hands when they get old, and they're more than delighted to have their veins taken out of their hands, and it rejuvenates them and they make them feel good. So it's an important part of my practice, and I enjoy doing it. Commandment number 3 is to make sure that you have your own vascular lab. The vascular lab is a fundamental source of income other than the fact that it's good practice. It should be owned by the vascular surgeon. And if you work in a hospital and you read the studies in the vascular lab, you should be well compensated for it. And I think you should become the director of the vascular lab, not the radiologist, and you should be paid well for it. 1 duplex scanner and 1 PVR machine and 1 reading doctor doing 8 studies a day will produce the same income as a vascular surgeon's surgery for that month. And most of that work is not being done by you. And if you've been in practice for 5 years and you're doing graft surveys and you're looking at the stents that you've been doing and your follow-up on aortic endografts and you're doing some carotid surveillance, you can keep 1 lab tap going all day, all year. So a vascular lab is integral. More importantly, commandment number 4 is to open your own outpatient endovascular center. How many people here have their own outpatient endovascular center? Just a few. This is a very significant part of our income, and I think a critical part of our income. I wrote a paper back, I think in 2007, which basically showed you how to set up one of these labs, but now they're all over the place, and I think they should be. Although the expenses are quite high, as you can see in the slide, the income is significant and the profit is very significant. This is good for patient care and good for the practice. If you're not doing them, and I think you should be, and the only question is how and where you should do it, and obviously that's a talk for another day. Commandment number 5 is get involved in prosthetics. Now, this is something we did not do, but it was a mistake, and I'll show you why you should be involved in prosthetics. These prosthetics are exceedingly expensive. BK1, a standard immediate one, is up to $2,000, an AK up to $3,000, an advanced one $3,500, and some of the new ones $25,000. So you spent a lot of money buying them, but look on the right side, look at the reimbursement. It's exceedingly dramatic, and you make a tremendous profit if you are involved in the prosthetic area. Now, admittedly, there's the capital that you have to do to set up and build up the space. You have to get attorneys and other things to, the soft costs, and you have to get a prosthetist, and they are not cheap. But understand this, that even though the reimbursement, it's like us, it includes all the visits to make sure that it works, Medicare allows you to change the prosthetic device every 2 years or sooner. And in fact, most people do require the device to be changed. So once you've got the patient in the practice, almost every 2 years, it's another device that you're buying and being reimbursed for. And the number of prosthetics that will be sold will grow exponentially. So it's not just how many amputations you do during that year, but over the ensuing years, it develops a large number of patients who are also more satisfied to have their prosthetics made in your own office. I think you should get involved in hyperbaric oxygen. These are too expensive to do on your own, but if you can, by all means, but get in a wound care center. Obviously, you should have allied health professionals. Physicians cannot be in 2 places at the same time, and these people make your lives easier, but also extend your ability to produce income. And as you can see from our large group over here, at least 3 of these were physician extenders. E&M codes. The primary care people make their money by EMN coding. You should make sure that you code as well and make sure that you code appropriately, but see more patients in the office. There's nothing wrong with seeing patients in the office, and you'll generate income. And maximize your payment by correct coding and use your physician's extenders. But more importantly, bring medical risk management into your practice. We are doctors, not only surgeons. We should be prescribing statins. We should be prescribing diet. But for example, exercise, structured exercise is paid for by Medicare, incorporated into your practice. It's good for the patients and good for your income. And incorporate smoking cessation into your practice, again, a source of income. And it's good for patients. And we've already heard, get involved in clinical trials. I can't really mention which companies I'm working for because of non-disclosure, but I think you probably know who I'm dealing with. But we've worked with all of these companies. And clinical trials bring a lot of income into your practice, and it's fun, and it's also good medicine. And finally, get paid for what we do for free. The hospital, as we've heard, pays its administrators a fortune. Why not us? So if you work in the vascular lab, you should be paid a directive fee. If you're the head of the operating room, you should get a directive fee. And if you're on the committees, you should get paid. And we are now having this in our institution. And certainly for ER call, you should get paid. I'm amazed how many people do ER call for nothing. Finally, as you know from this slide, there were more than just two tablets when Moses came down. So there was an 11th commandment. And the 11th commandment in this case is you must advertise, because doctors read the newspaper and watch TV as well, and everybody else is advertising. And you can go to any city and you'll see multiple advertisements for vein clinics. So we need to advertise. We need to advertise properly. And I think that if you follow all of these commandments, you'll improve your practice. Your practice will be financially solvent. But I think most importantly, before I leave, I've spoken a lot about money. And sometimes I feel embarrassed about speaking about money, but I don't think you should be embarrassed, provided that what you do is ethical, that you provide quality care with integrity, because if we forget the patient care and just go after money, we hurt the patients and ourselves. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
Thank you, Russell. We'll move on to the next speaker, Lisa Ochoa, coming in from San Antonio, the path less traveled in private practice.
All right. Well, Dr. Bismuth, thank you so much for inviting me. I've never been to SCVS, and I can tell you in these sessions I've listened to already, I have learned so much, and I probably need to speak to each one of you guys at some point. I get the opportunity to tell you about my private practice and what I started in San Antonio. I'm only 5 years old, and so really started from scratch, and hopefully I can give some insight onto how I've done it, and then I appreciate that they've already dispelled the rumors of private practice. And so to start, I tell my story with a lot of maps. I feel like maps give you a lot of information, especially in regard to health issues. I didn't move very far. I lived in Texas, trained in Texas, practiced in Texas, but it's still like its own country. And so I actually started practice in the south side near the Texas-Mexico border. I went to Baylor College of Medicine where I did all my training, medical school, general surgery, vascular surgery. And I got my first job in San Antonio. And when I first moved to San Antonio, I joined a very large private practice group. In that group, I was the only female surgeon. I joined a group of about 20, 21 surgeons. And the one thing I noticed as I was working north to south of San Antonio was actually the geographic differences, the difference in the hospital systems, the difference in the patients, the outcomes, the care that they got. And it was when I began to ask about, well, shouldn't we have a role in equity care in San Antonio? Shouldn't we have a role in preventing amputations and being a conversation? And for the most part, the attitude I got from my previous group was, it's a waste of our time. They should come to us, not really interested. And so this map is a map of San Antonio, north to south, dark being the wealthier areas and the light being the poverty-stricken areas. And my practice actually focuses now in the most underserved areas. And so it was very intimidating when I even thought of how was I going to start my own practice. And I was fortunate to get some advice from some business partners and actually start planning for this. I started planning a year before I left, before I gave notice to start my own practice. And I started with a budget, started with financing. And one thing I learned that was reassuring is banks love to give money to doctors. So getting them to sponsor my business plan was actually not too hard. But for me, what I wanted to know was, how many patients do I have to see in clinic? How many surgeries do I have to do? How many OBL cases is it going to take for me to be financially viable? And so we calculated what those numbers and clinical volume, and when I saw those numbers and realized that I had already been doing that very easily, it kind of gave me the confidence to take that leap and start to build my own practice. I did my research. I went and visited other private practice practitioners across the nation to learn what they had did when they started, what were the do's and don'ts, and I got a lot of support in trying to start my own practice from them, which was very, very valuable. And then making sure we bring the right team together is having the right practice consultant or manager level employee who sees your vision and understands what you're doing. Credentialing, EMR, and coding and billing, I first hired someone else to do it when I started my practice, but now I've taken those responsibilities into my practice. And so when I left that large group and I decided that I was going to stay in San Antonio, I really wanted to address a need that the city had. This is a map of diabetic-related amputations, with the darker blue being the highest areas of amputations and the light ones being the less. And so literally in San Antonio, in some of these areas, there are 3 times that diabetic-related amputations than the state of Texas. And there was nobody in these areas. Nobody was wanting to go to these underserved areas. And so that was kind of my initial vision and mission, is can I move the needle on these rates? And I figured I was going to do that by being extremely collaborative. Everybody is a part, whether it's referring providers, the hospitals, the Medicare Advantage groups, insurers, non-medical academic institutions, clinical, medical schools, everyone. Anyone who wanted to talk to me and was interested in trying how to tackle this issue in a zip code by zip code basis, I would be willing to have a conversation with. What put really my passion into this is everyone asked, well, why is this happening? Why do we have certain zip codes in San Antonio that have such different outcomes than the north side of San Antonio? The map on this side over here actually shows what we call the hardship index, and it puts all those socioeconomic factors that we know: poverty, educational attainment, household income, percent unemployment, crowding, and rates one zip code to another on how hard it is to live in that zip code. And there's no surprise that the map you saw before of diabetes-related amputations relates to this exact same map. But what kind of really impassioned me was when I learned that this has happened, that this was intentional, and it happened way back in San Antonio in the 1930s. This other map is a map of redline San Antonio, and redlining was when, after the Great Depression, the government decided that they wanted to help Americans come out of poverty by helping them buy their homes and their land. But what they also did is they intentionally designated certain areas in certain cities of hazardous to invest in, versus the opposite. And so this is a map of downtown San Antonio, and the near west, near east, and south side are where our Hispanic and African American communities are. So what was intentional 30 years ago and was lack of investment in these areas contributed to where we are still today in 2023. And so one of the ways that I have addressed these social determinants of health is by putting my clinics in those areas specifically. And so I have 6 clinics in San Antonio, and I actually go to rural areas just 30 minutes south of there. And you can see those 2 bottom locations. Other than obviously practicing great vascular surgery and providing quality care, I realized that if we were going to move the needle and we're going to be impactful in changing diabetes amputations, we had to really go upstream. And I know we probably all now have heard about social determinants of health. And so this graphic kind of lays it out for me of, what contributes to social determinants of health, which is the fact that this contributes more than 50% of healthcare outcomes. And the clinical care that we actually do only affects 20% of healthcare outcomes. So if we're going to move the needle at outcomes, we have to take into consideration all these areas in economic stability, neighborhood, education, food, community, and the healthcare system itself. And so what I see this as an opportunity for intervention from these upstream all the way to downstream before they end up to see us on interventions to make a big difference on that outcome. And so our practice at SAVE consciously participates outside of the medical field and interacts with nonprofits, the city, the county, to try to make moves in each one of these areas. I'm glad everyone was talking about having the best of both worlds. And so as a private practitioner, I am fortunate that I do get to participate in training some of our future physicians. And so all the way down from high school, I have high school interns as freshmen rotate and get paid to do a job in the summer at my office, to college students, to medical students. And I'm still working on getting fellows and residents. But if anybody would like to send fellows and residents to me, let me know. I'm happy to participate. I make it conscious to be a part of the professional societies and conferences, and I was so honored to be invited to this one. I have not been to SCVS, and I think I found a place where I belong. And also partnering with other academic programs within San Antonio to collaborate and figure out how we take what we know in academics into the real world, what happens in community practice, which is where the majority of patients get taken care of. And so when we can create that partnership and collaborations, I think that's how we really move the needle and make big differences in healthcare outcomes for everybody. As a community practice, it doesn't inherently limit surgical difficulty. I still do everything I was trained to do. Although I am in the community practice, so there are those fenestrated endografts, some of the things that I don't do often that I will refer out, but for the most part, I still do everything that I was trained to do. And I think this is a balance with every surgeon, what they're comfortable with. But I'm still learning. I still learn TCARs, and I learn a lot of other techniques, because as we all talked about, we're always learning. One other part, when we talk about values and what's important to me, and everyone has said this up here, one thing that I insisted when we opened this practice is that we were going to practice evidence-based medicine. We all have seen some of these articles that have come out about appropriateness of care and where that happens. And so we know that we've talked about how the mix of procedures done once OBLs or outpatient labs got built, that those percentages changed. And so I consciously look at my numbers to make sure that I am still practicing within evidence-based recommendations. And so that is very important to me and for the future physicians and practitioners that come into my practice. And ultimately, I really focus my practice on serving our community like we all do. And in San Antonio, this is a map of every Medicare-accredited surgery center. We all know how important surgery centers were during COVID when we weren't allowed to do elective surgeries in the hospitals. And so what you will see is that there are actually zero surgery centers on the south side of San Antonio that serves over 500,000 people. And so I built my clinic and OBL to be a surgery center, and we're currently working on getting Medicare accredited. Understanding that maybe, yes, I can do some procedures there, but also creating the space for everybody else, the general surgeons, the podiatrists, the pain doctors, to be able to serve that community as well. And if I can incentivize other physicians and specialists to come down there, the community is better served. And so, were there hazardous conditions along the path less traveled? Yes. I left the largest group in Texas to start my own practice, and I can tell you it was not easy. Maybe we'll hear a little bit about that experience later, but I did have issues in hospitals where I was reported for things and things got escalated. And it was really hard to kind of fight that as a single surgeon at the time. I have another surgeon in the group now. As a new CEO, I had to learn a lot of things. Human resources, other people, managing other people was really hard. Learning about expenses and running the business. I can tell you, though, always seeking advice from others and learning from others is how it happens. And so I'm still learning, and which is why I think in this conference today, I learned a lot. Also, being a solo surgeon, when I first started, the challenge was that the hospitals, I had no pool. I had no support. I didn't get block time with optimal times. Finding the first assistant to help me on a complex case was challenging. Being on 24/7 call by myself, it was not easy. But I can tell you that the work that I've put in now and where my practice is going has definitely been worthwhile. There's independence, there's flexibility. I wouldn't have done it any other way. So, less traveled, yes, but not impossible. And I like that we're all talking about that when I was in academics, when I finished training, I thought it was a dichotomous choice. It was academics or sell your souls to the devil. And I realized that we can actually create a private practice that is on the continuum and does both, maintains excellence, maintains quality, and affects the community. And so for me, what's inspiring is that when I commit time, energy, and resources to the community, it helps your voice be heard when you feel silenced. It gives you hope when you feel discouraged and gives you energy when you feel exhausted. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lisa. I think we'll probably just have time to finish the last talk. I'll invite Angela Echeverria up here to speak on pitfalls of private practice, blinded by the light. We probably won't have time for a discussion, unfortunately, but looking forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to everybody in the organizing committee and Dr. Bismuth for having me. We heard a lot of wonderful things about private practice, and there's a lot of great things going on in private practice, but I'm here today to talk about my experience and some of the pitfalls and how when I signed up to go into private practice just out of fellowship, I was blinded by the light. So let me set the stage. Here I am, a graduating fellow from Baylor College of Medicine. Boy, I thought that I had it all figured out. I'd worked a lot of hours, I felt well trained, I had this great piece of paper with this big embossed gold seal that they gave me this fancy frame for. I thought I could take on the world. I was so burnt out on academics, I couldn't run from it fast enough. And when you come from a big academic center, it's almost embarrassing to some people who train you when you say, I want to go into private practice. So how it began. So I embarked on a journey in Southwest Florida in a private practice with a contract where I was employed with a plan to partnership. I had 4 weeks vacation, evenly split call. I thought it was the best of both worlds. So this type of a model that I had joined, the salary draw, all of the owners and partners took after splitting all the receipts and all the expenses with very little being left at the end for the business to be taxed. Sounded great to me. I didn't realize joining a private practice meant all of this was entailed. It was now human resources, marketing, finance. How do you make those numbers work? Your IT, contract negotiation, both with the other groups in town. You have an office-based lab and you need to negotiate pricing, and I learned all things like bundles and buckets where the wires and the balloons and the stents and the atherectomy devices were all included, and you got a price break if you used all these items. Revenue cycle management, facility management, it's a whole lot. So I encountered some drawbacks. Some partners are more business savvy than others. Some are more family-oriented, where it felt like a very nice conversation, where there was nothing malicious and everybody could state their opinion. I also realized, looking at my senior partners, that once you make partner, this is the top of your career path. This frightened me. The other thing I learned very closely when I would make suggestions for improvement or possibly learning a new surgical procedure or purchasing some type of new equipment was that the partner's income was decreased with each new hire or each expenditure that occurred. And then there were very obvious conflicting priorities of the partners that surfaced. So after being there about a year, you get your numbers, and every quarter you sit down and go over your numbers. And I started to feel the financial pressures and felt pressured to alter my treatment algorithms for what was going to be better for the practice. I also noticed that all of a sudden now, cases that initially I was doing, the straightforward carotid, the EVAR with virgin groins, these things weren't being placed in my clinic, and that there was preferential placement of new referrals. There's ongoing decreasing reimbursement from all different insurance partners, making it more challenging to stay in private practice. And outside of what Russell shared with us, there's very little of vascular surgery that's really cash pay. And there's increasing costs of running a practice with decreasing qualified people to hire. So I felt like I was missing something. I no longer was getting to do the cases that I really enjoyed doing. I no longer was working with residents and students, which I really enjoyed. I felt that the practice and the financial pressures were overwhelming and that it was affecting me and what I was going to work for. And I was always on call. The 3 A's: you have to be available, affable, and have the ability. And I was taught early on that if you have these, you'll always be a success. Well, it starts to burn you out. So what I learned, this model didn't work for me. And I wish that I would have learned more about business education and training, and I wish that I had found a mentor in training in private practice to help me navigate this type of practice setting, also my contract, and maybe find that perfect practice for myself. I also learned my why. Why do I do what I do every single day? I like to teach. I like to be challenged. I don't want the straightforward 90% SFA stenosis in a claudicant. I don't mind doing a redo aortobifem. I don't mind taking out infected grafts. And it also made me do some soul searching as to my balance. And I think in every one of us, being lifelong learners, I'm up here telling you, I could have made a better decision. But you know what? I learned a whole heck of a lot at an early age in my career, and now I'm somewhere where I'm very happy. And this is my why, and why I can't be on call in private practice every single day, because I like to spend more of my time on the water. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Actually, thank you. I think you're the only one that stayed on time, so I appreciate that. We're unfortunately not going to have time for any questions. I think the only takeaway for me is education. I think everybody would agree on that probably we need a lot of education in this space in our training programs. So hopefully we can take that up in the future and that be part of how we train our residents as they go out into the real world.